What if everything you've ever done, every thought, every desire, every intention was recorded? Not by camera, not by witness, but by the field itself. Not just you, everyone, every soul, every life, every choice across every timeline. A library so vast, so subtle, it exists not in space, but in frequency. This is the Akashic Records, not a myth, not a metaphor, but a living field of memory, mentioned in ancient texts, echoed in mystic visions, resonant in the intuitive silence that sometimes speaks before you do. Akasha, a Sanskrit word meaning ether, the fifth element, the subtle substrate of the universe. In it, nothing is lost, only layered, like light refracted through dimension. The records don't exist in some far-off temple. They are the temple, the vibrational blueprint of everything that ever was and could be. And you have access, not as privilege, as birthright. Because the soul doesn't read the records, it writes them. And sometimes, you remember how to read what you wrote. If this part awakened a strange familiarity you can't explain, comment. I've touched the ether, because maybe you've already been in the library. You just forgot you knew the way in. The Akashic Records are not new. They were known, but called by different names. In ancient Egypt, they spoke of the Hall of Mayet, a chamber of truth where every deed of a soul was weighed, not metaphorically, but vibrationally. In Vedic India, Akasha was not just space, it was memory itself, the field of all impressions, where karma was not judged, but stored. In Jewish mysticism, the Sefer HaChaim, the Book of Life, was said to record all human thought and action, read not by angels, but by the soul itself between lifetimes. In Islamic Gnosis, the preserved tablet, Al-Law al-Mahfuz, held all that was, is, and will be, inscribed by divine intention before time itself began. In Tibetan tradition, advanced monks accessed subtle mind stream imprints, memories that survived death and could be read in states of deep meditation. And in early Christianity, there were whispers of the living record, a scroll written not on paper, but in the light of the soul. Every culture knew it, not through science, through silence, through inward vision, through altered states, through surrender. Because the library doesn't open through force, it opens through frequency. And those who touched it didn't just gain knowledge, they remembered who they were before they forgot. If this part made ancient myths feel like hidden blueprints, comment. The names were many, but the field was one. Because maybe all the sacred books are just pages of the same archive. A library built of light has no walls, no books, no shelves. So how is anything stored? The Akashic Records don't hold data. They hold frequency. Every thought emits a vibration. Every intention leaves a trace. Every decision ripples through the field. And the field doesn't forget, because energy cannot be destroyed, only transformed. The records are not written. They are encoded. Encoded in patterns, in geometry, in resonance. Your soul doesn't write with words. It writes with coherence. When you choose love over fear, you write harmony into your record. When you betray truth, you inscribe distortion. These impressions are subtle, but permanent, not as punishment, as learning. The library is not moral, it is mathematical. It stores what you radiate, what you align with, what you repeat. And when you enter it, you don't read in the human sense. You feel, you receive vibrational clarity, a download, a knowing. And what you access is never random. It reflects where you are, what you're ready for, and what you're willing to integrate. Because the records are not passive, they respond to your resonance. If this part made you realize knowledge is a mirror, comment, I inscribe in frequency. Because maybe you're not reading a book, you're reading yourself. You cannot force your way in. The records don't open to demand, they open to alignment. Access is not about worthiness, it's about readiness. The library is not locked. You are, not by someone else, by noise, by ego, by dissonance. To enter the field, you must match its tone, and its tone is silence. This is why the records open in altered states, deep meditation, lucid dreams, near-death experience, moments of stillness so complete you forget your name. Because the you who wants to read cannot enter. Only the presence beneath the name can. Access requires surrender, slowing down the mind until thought becomes space. opening the heart until intention becomes prayer, dropping expectation until curiosity becomes humility. The doorway is narrow, not because it excludes, because truth is subtle, and the field will only mirror what you're prepared to feel. No filters, no flattery, only frequency. If this part made you feel why the still moments matter more than noise, comment. I listen to silence because you don't get in by trying. You get in by tuning. It doesn't feel like reading. It feels like remembering. You close your eyes, slow your breath, and fall inward. Not down, deeper. At first it's silence, but not empty, alive. Then comes sensation, a subtle density, a shift in pressure, like being underwater but weightless. Then, the impressions arrive, not images, not words, knowings, sudden clarity, like answers dropped in your chest, not as ideas, as frequencies. You see a memory, but not yours. Or maybe it is. You feel a question, but no one asked it. And yet, it's being answered. Some report visions, temples of light, scrolls, guides. But these are metaphors. The field speaks in the language your soul will understand. Sometimes it's a single sentence. Sometimes a wave of grief that isn't yours, but now is. Sometimes it's nothing, just a silence so precise it leaves you changed. And how do you know it's real? Because the knowing doesn't fade. Because what you accessed was not information. It was resonance. And you can't unfeel what recalibrated you. If this part felt like a memory you haven't had yet, comment. I've stepped through. Because entry is not about vision, it's about vibration. The records are not a history book. They are a living field. They don't just contain what happened. They contain what could happen, what almost happened, what always wanted to happen, but never did. The past is there, not as fact, but as pattern. The future is there, not as prophecy, but as probability. The present is there, not as a snapshot, but as a convergence point. And in the field, you can glimpse versions of you haven't met yet. The self that followed a different instinct. The self that healed faster. The self that chose silence instead of reaction. The self that lived a life you only dreamed about. They're all there, not as fantasies, but as actual trajectories waiting to be tuned. You may also feel others, souls you've crossed in countless lifetimes, patterns repeating in relationships, familiarity with strangers that logic can't explain. Because the records are not chronological, they're harmonic. You don't access time, you access resonance. And when your frequency aligns, you don't just see it, you step into it. You feel how it would feel to walk that path. You glimpse not the outcome, but the field it requires you to become. And in that glimpse, choice is born. Because once you see who you could be, you stop settling for who you were. If this part made you feel like your life has more versions than you've dared imagine, comment. I've seen the strands. Because maybe your future isn't waiting. It's vibrating right next to you. For centuries, access to the Akashic Records was reserved for mystics, monks, seers, guarded, hidden, encrypted through ritual, silence, devotion. Why? Because the world wasn't coherent enough. The collective field was dense, distracted, addicted to form, terrified of the unseen. In such noise, subtle frequency can't be heard, but something is shifting. You feel it. Time accelerates, dreams intensify, more people awaken. Old systems collapse, not from failure, from frequency mismatch. And with that collapse, a new clarity emerges. The field is thinning, the veil is lifting, the records are becoming more accessible. Not because they moved closer, but because you did. The nervous system of humanity is evolving, from survival to sensing, from fear to feeling, from memorizing to remembering. The age of external authority is fading. The inner archive is awakening, and those who once whispered in shadows are now teaching in the open. Because now, more than ever, we need to remember who we are, not just individually, but collectively, to see the patterns, to unwrite the loops, to choose a new vibration for the timeline ahead. If this part made you feel like you're part of something ancient returning, comment. I arrived when the records reopened, because the library was never closed. We just weren't quiet enough to hear it. Access is not the goal. Integration is. Because knowing the story means nothing if you don't rewrite the pattern. When you enter the records, you don't just see your wounds. You see where they came from, how many lifetimes they've looped. You feel the thread from childhood to ancestry to karmic imprint. But this isn't about blame, it's about choice. Because when you see the root, you can finally stop treating the symptom. You stop asking, why am I like this? And start asking, what am I repeating? You can also access gifts, skills you've earned across timelines, healing hands you forgot you had, songs you never learned but always knew, languages you've never studied but understand. Because the soul doesn't discard, it archives. And through intention, stillness, and coherence, you can retrieve those codes. Not to prove anything, to embody. The more you remember, the more you resonate. And resonance rewrites reality. You begin to see life not as obstacle, but as invitation. Not as fate, but as feedback. You respond, not react. You soften, not shrink. You act from clarity, not compulsion. Because when you walk with your record open, you stop living by default. You begin living on purpose. If this part made you feel like the story isn't over, because you're the one finishing it, comment, I live from the archive. Because memory isn't just something you have, it's something you use. The records don't lie, but your filter might. When you enter the field, you don't become empty. You bring yourself with you, your hopes, your fears, your beliefs, and those can distort the signal. If you expect drama, you'll receive imagery shaped by it. If you want confirmation, you may only find what pleases you. This isn't deception, it's projection. The records are pure, but the receiver must be clean. That's why intention matters more than method, why quiet matters more than ritual. The field will reflect your coherence, not your technique. So how do you know if what you receive is true? Feel it. Truth arrives without rush. It settles. It doesn't flatter. It clarifies. If what you downloaded made you feel superior, check your ego. If it made you feel small and unworthy, check your shame. The records don't judge. They don't threaten. They reveal. And revelation always feels like relief. Not because it's easy, because it's real. If this part brought discernment to your seeking, comment, I filter with presence. Because every truth must pass through you, and how clear you are shapes how clear it stays. You are not the only one with a record. Every family has one, every nation, every culture, every species. Collective fields, group memories, shared frequencies shaped by repetition across generations, wars that echo, beliefs that persist, trauma that loops without visible cause. You feel it. You carry stories that aren't yours, but live inside you. Stories of scarcity, of fear, of inherited silence. They are not fate. They are recordings. But just as you can access your own imprint, you can access the collective one. You can enter the record of womanhood, of ancestry, of the land beneath your feet, and you can retune it through presence, not by preaching, by holding. Every time you forgive a wrong older than your life, you release its vibration from the field. Every time you feel grief that doesn't belong to you, but let it move, you soften a knot in the human archive. You are not just healing yourself, you are editing the echo. This is sacred work, not loud, not public, but tectonic, because the records respond not to opinion, but to resonance. If this part made you feel how big your presence truly is, comment, I rewrite the shared field, because when you shift inside, the whole archive ripples. The library doesn't stop at Earth, because Earth doesn't exist in isolation. The Akashic field isn't a local archive. It is the substrate of awareness woven through all dimensions, all timelines, all beings. Every star system has its own field, every species its own resonance record, and these archives interlink. That's why some souls carry wisdom they never learned, memories of star systems they've never seen in this life. They remember blue temples, bioluminescent worlds, languages without sound, and we call it fantasy. But the soul doesn't imagine, it recalls. Akashic explorers have reported connecting with planetary libraries, non-human intelligence, even cosmic archives that make Earth's field feel like a single shelf. Because this library is nested, fractal, from the cellular to the celestial. And you are not limited to human memory. You are a node in the galactic archive, which means the questions you can ask are much bigger than your biography. You can inquire about the origin of soul groups, about the collapse of ancient planetary grids, about why Earth is so dense and why so many souls came here now. You may not receive answers in words, but the resonance never lies. If this part made you feel like your story started long before Earth, comment, "I remember the stars," because the library doesn't start here, and neither does you. Now you know, the Akashic Records are not fiction. They are frequency, not elsewhere. Here, not for the gifted, for the willing. And you've always been connected. You don't access the library. You are in it. Every breath, every belief, every act of courage or avoidance inscribes a line. You are the book writing itself. And now, you remember you can write with awareness. You can shift the story, not erase it, transmute it. You can forgive what was never apologized for. You can reclaim gifts long buried under shame. You can see patterns, not as chains, but as invitations. You can trace the wound, not to dwell, but to dissolve. And above all, you can choose what comes next. Not because you're perfect, because you're present. The field doesn't need purity. It needs coherence. You don't need answers. You need alignment. Because every step you take in awareness updates the grid. Every moment of integrity resonates backward and forward. The future isn't waiting to be discovered. It's waiting to be written. And you hold the pen. So ask yourself, if your soul is always recording, what do you want it to remember from this moment? If this journey shifted how you carry your story, comment, "I write with awareness," because the library never closes, but it listens. And now that you remember, you can begin.